Hello, everybody. Has everybody had a chance to get a drink that wanted to? I think we'll get started. Welcome to Cocktails and Conversation. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Jeannie Hilscher. I'm on the House Committee, which is the group that sponsors this speaker series. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. And unlike the speakers that we had in the past, which were two residents, Suzanne Keedy and Nadir Ardalan, Dr. Ted, we call him Dr. Ted, is a personal friend. We actually met Ted and his wife Rosemary when our husbands were coaching our sons when they were 7, and they're now 47. So that's how far our history goes back, and every year Ted and Romy and our other dear friends, Julie and Herb, come to visit us in February, and Ted had been nice enough in the past to say, you know, I'd be willing to speak. He heard that we had a speaker series, and I felt a little guilty about making him work to earn the free breakfast, lunches, and dinners he said he wanted. But he took me up on the offer this year. So I think that maybe the only detriment to our friendship for him is that whenever we have a medical question, he's always the first person we call, even though he's a cardiologist and many of our questions have nothing to do with the heart. So let me tell you a little bit about Ted. He's been a faculty member of the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University for over 30 years. While he continues to teach, he left practice when he got an MBA from the Kellogg Graduate School of Business in 2006. He then worked as a consultant. Currently, he teaches medical decision-making and public policy in medicine. As a practicing physician, Ted was an innovator in the development of coronary care units in Chicago. As a specialist in intensive care, he was a Heart Association volunteer, developing courses in CPR and advanced cardiac care support. He also developed an expertise in sports medicine and was the director of the Chicago Marathon for 25 years. Recently, he's been working on a book on the history of hospitals and medicine in Chicago. Today, he's going to discuss with us some concepts on medicine, how it has grown, and its current complexity. So please help me welcome Dr. Ted.
Thank you, Jeannie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. So those of you who can't hear me, raise your hand. I'm very happy to be here with you. Jeannie thinks I'm sort of an expert. The medical definition of an expert is somebody you don't know who has slides. So I guess I make it. What we're going to, every medical discussion these days has to have a disclosure page that sort of outlines what potential biases you may have as you're giving the talk. This talk is going to have nothing to do with any of my potential biases. What we're going to talk about today is two things. We're going to talk about what's happened in health and healthcare, and I'm going to start at the beginning of the 20th century. And that's not that long ago for many of us, right? We're then going to talk a little bit about payment and how healthcare is doing these days to give us some idea of where we go. Payment and policy have been intimately intertwined for the last somewhere around 60 years, maybe 70. So what is healthcare today? What do you want when you're thinking about healthcare? Think about that for a second. When I ask this question to my medical students, my pre-med students, and other people, they usually say something like, I'd like availability. We'll talk about that in a minute. I want to consider the cost. As I was talking to Mary Pat, she said, well, isn't the cost of medical care today the biggest cause of bankruptcies in the country? That's a widely quoted statistic. I don't know that there are any real hard data on that, empiric data. Well, how about quality? We think our medical care is the highest quality in the world. Anybody here disagree with that statement? Okay, there are 3 of you, 4 or 5 of you who don't think our quality is very good.
No, we didn't say that. We didn't think it's number 1 in the world.
Okay. And Many people say they want medical care that's up to date, and you talk then about procedures, you want something done, and high tech is clearly better and new stuff is better than old stuff. Okay? Let's talk about that a bit. Availability, I would say, is on demand. How many of you are happy waiting a week and a half to see a doctor? How many of you would much rather see a doctor in less than a week and a half from the time you decide you want to get care? All right, so that's important. How many of you are happy waiting in the doctor's waiting room? If you get to the waiting room, you're happy to be in there because you're going to be seen at some point. All right. How many of you could see your doctor at a time which was convenient for you before you, like me, got white hair? It was often hard to see a doctor at a time that was convenient for you because the doctors had the same hours you had as business people. And so, and very often seeing the doctor you want to see isn't right where you want to see them. Cost? So the question on cost of care is who pays? From there you can go almost anywhere. Quality. Well, can we define quality in medical care? Or are we like Justice Stuart Potter, who when he was describing obscenity said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And so you wonder about things like that. Up to date. We want stuff that's new. Sometimes new isn't necessarily what you want or get. I know somebody here who's taking a medicine that he thinks is the most potent stuff around that was actually released in 1964. It still may be most important. So is new necessarily better? What else would you consider in the things that we expect when we're thinking about healthcare? Any other feature of it? You want a doctor who is empathetic and deals with you as a whole person. We'll talk about that a little bit. Thank you, Jeannie.
And a good communicator.
That caring and a good communicator. People used to accuse me of speaking English when I was talking about medicine, as opposed to Latin. All right. So 1900. So what did we have in 1900? The telephone became a means of communicating in 1877. So we had the phone, and you could potentially phone your doctor if you were on the same exchange that he or she was on. It was almost always a he, but there were some she's. The automobile, most care was given at home. A doctor either took his horse or his carriage to your house. The automobile didn't really become a major means of transportation until about 1908. In 1908, the doctors said the automobile cut their time to practice in about half. Office calls were not really a big deal then. Drinking water became important. The Chicago River was reversed in 1900, so it was right in the beginning of the century, in order to take the sewage from the city away from the Lake Michigan drinking water intake. That's my only Chicago thing I'll talk about. Bloodletting really wasn't being done very much, but it was still in many of the textbooks of medicine. You use either instruments, which is called a lancet, or you put leeches on the people. Oh, by the way, opium was a big deal in those days. So we haven't gone very far ahead. We had aspirin. Tuberculosis was just clarified 18 years before the turn of the century, when the tuberculosis was finally found and people began to look at tuberculosis as a communicable disease. Initially, it was thought to just be a social disease. The electrocardiogram. How many of you had an electrocardiogram in your life? The electrocardiogram was just described in 1908. Eindhoven, who described it, was Dutch, and heart in Dutch begins with a K. So cardio in Dutch is a K, that's why some people call electrocardiogram an EKG. So that's what we began the 20th century with. In the first 20 years of the 20th century, not a lot happened. Vaccinations became a bigger deal. That was about all. In the 1920s and 30s, we began to discover all kinds of neat stuff. Vitamins. How many of you took vitamins when you were a kid? And cod liver oil, absolutely. My mother gave me cod liver oil, I ate it. But cod liver, iodine for women who used to get thyroid disease with the thyroid swelling was because there wasn't iodine in the Midwestern water. And so we iodized salt, and now nobody has avoided it. Those few of you from Chicago may have noticed that Tony Prickly has got a big swelling in her neck. That was from iodine deficiency. So insulin was discovered in 1920. Prior to 1920, people with diabetes type 1 died. The iron lung was developed for polio in 1929. Polio was a big deal. I want you to remember that date, please. Sulfa drugs became available in 1935. That's just before the Canadians got into the Second World War. Took you guys a lot longer. But sulfa drugs began a whole new era in medicine. They were probably amongst the biggest, what Christensen called disruptive innovations in medicine, and that was just in 1935. From that point, infectious diseases were treatable. Prior to that, if you got an abscess, a surgeon could drain it, and hopefully you wouldn't die from it. When President Garfield was shot in 1881, the guy who shot him said, "I didn't kill Garfield, I just shot him." The doctors killed him because they weren't able to treat the infections. As infectious diseases or communicable diseases were treatable, we began to have a whole series of other diseases that were called non-communicable diseases, or NCDs. The 1940s and 50s, in this slide, I count 9 disruptive innovations that I think were disruptive in what happens to us. The first open heart operation was within most of our lifetimes. 1953 was the first heart operation using a heart-lung bypass machine. How many of you remember a psychiatric hospital somewhere near where you live? Chlorpromazine closed all of those hospitals. Schizophrenia became treatable, psychosis became treatable, everything changed. How many of you can remember seeing a psychiatric hospital recently? Where? Okay. Addiction, okay, that's really an addiction hospital rather than psych for schizophrenia and manic depressive disorder. Yes, you're right, absolutely. Chromosomes were found in 1956, and the first chromosome disease was Down syndrome, which was due to 3 chromosome 21s rather than just 2 like you're supposed to have. That's chromosomes. They were found after the DNA was described in 1952. How many of you heard of a woman named Rosalind Franklin? So Rosalind Franklin was a scientist in Oxford, and she took a picture of DNA and with one of her students, which was called photograph 51. That was the thing that really gave the structure of DNA to be visualized. So people often ask, well, what did Watson and Crick really discover? They're credited with discovering DNA. What they really discovered was Rosalind Franklin's pictures. It's a woman in medicine. First coronary angiogram, several of you I'm sure had a coronary angiogram, was done right around 1960. Probably the golden age of medical innovation was the 1960s. The other slides I've shown you have had 2 decades and up to 9 innovations. On this slide, my count is 15 disruptive innovations. A lot happened in the 1960s. Now, we get to Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. That's important. How many of you who are American citizens have Medicare as part of your health care plan payment? Most of the Canadians go home together rather than do it here. Medicare and Medicaid started in 1965. Social Security started in 1935, and so Medicare and Medicaid are amendments to the Social Security Act. When it started, kidney dialysis was just beginning. Artificial hips were just beginning. CPR was just beginning. We didn't know much about the causes of diseases. So a town in Massachusetts called Framingham began a study to look at what happened to people. The Framingham Heart Study showed that high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, overweight, and underexercise were related to the development of heart disease. And you all know that now, right? Everybody knows those 5 things. They didn't in 1961. Now we're getting closer to today. In 1973, the cholesterol receptor was discovered, and drugs like Mevacor and Zocor and Lipitor were produced to help treat high cholesterol because we then knew that treating high cholesterol would prevent heart disease. How many of you are taking one of those drugs? Wouldn't have had that before 1973. First coronary angioplasty, this is not surgery now, this is the angioplasty, was 1977. My favorite Time magazine article is the topic says, cholesterol now the bad news. You couldn't have eggs and bacon anymore. Because we learned that getting cholesterol lowered prevented heart disease. The other thing that happened was in 2000, the Institute of Medicine published a booklet called To Err as Humans. They began to take human fallacies, human foibles out of the practice of medicine. And in 2003, the human genome was translated. There's a lot of stuff happened since 2003. We thought that was going to allow us to get genetic medicine and we were going to cure everything because we could get the genes gotten rid of or treated. Hasn't quite happened. There's a disease that many of you may have called atrial fibrillation. How many of you got AFib? A few of us. AFib is in fact genetically determined. There are at least 79 different genetic diseases that cause atrial fibrillation. And that accounts for less than 10% of all atrial fibrillation. So it isn't quite as simple as we had hoped with the genetic revolution. Personalized medicine is supposed to use your genome and allow you to take drugs better, and it might. There are certain diseases that it helps with hugely. Many cancers, you can get a specific site in the cell that allows you to attack a cancer and not the rest of the cells in the body. That's better than it used to be. That's in a very few instances. So far, the genetic revolution hasn't given us quite what we had hoped it was going to give us. So what have we got? What have we done? Well, we've gone from bloodletting to scientific basis of practice. We've got germ theory. We've got deficiency diseases. We've got wonder drugs that have changed from infections killing everybody to degeneration killing everybody, and other things. And we've got most of the non-communicable diseases having raised their ugly heads. Not only in North America, but also in the rest of the world. NCDs are amongst the things that most people worry about. So that's where we've been and where we've gotten. We've accomplished a lot in the development of medicine. How are we doing on the provision of healthcare in this century? What may lie ahead? So let's talk about where we are. In 1980, most of the developed world, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is a conglomeration of 36 of the more developed nations in the world, had about somewhere between 5 and 8% of their gross domestic product going to paying for medical care. Everybody has had that go up. It's unfortunate that the cost of care has gone up that much, but look who's gone up most. We now spend somewhere north of 16% of our gross domestic product is spent on the delivery of healthcare. Heck, we ought to be getting better than anybody else, right? Where does it go? This is an interesting slide from a couple of years ago. From 1996 to 2014, the amount of money that we spend on healthcare increased 18% per year. From 2014 to 2016, it's only been 11% per year that cost of healthcare has gone up. However, inflation has gone up 2 or 3% per year. So healthcare is still going up more than anybody else. Hospital care is the biggest contributor to this. Oh, by the way, do you think in the United States we, as patients, spend more or less time in the hospital than in the rest of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development? Less. Most other countries in Europe and in Asia have people spend much more time in the hospital, even though their healthcare costs are way less. Between hospitals and doctors, 60% of healthcare. We, as doctors, complain a lot about the 9% of healthcare cost that goes into administration. We don't think they add much to the delivery of care, but that's my bias speaking again. Pharmaceuticals are about 11% of all we spend. We complain about the cost of pharmaceuticals. That's real and big, but it's not the biggest player. The biggest two players are hospitals and doctors. How do we rank as far as health is concerned? Well, Canucks actually live about 2 and a bit years longer than do Yankees.
It's cold.
It's colder. We're kinder too. The UK is between Canada and the United States. And notice what's happened since 1914, or 2014. The American increase in life expectancy has begun to tail. Oh yeah, but that's one set of data. Who believes a single set of data? So I'll show you this slide. Those are two curves from two different research organizations talking about life expectancy. Best I can see, they're superimposable. And so it isn't biased reporting, this is real stuff. How do we rank in health? We spend more than the rest of the OECD, and our population is less healthy in all ages than in Great Britain. You remember the Olympics, the last Olympics, the British were very proud of their healthcare system, and they actually had that as part of their opening ceremonies. And they're justifiably, I think, proud of their system. What are some of the reasons for this disparity? Well, one is income. And in every year cohort that we look at in this slide, There is a gap between upper income and lower income people. The gap between the richest and poorest in men is almost 15%. In women, rich women don't do as well compared to poor women, as do rich men compared to poor men. So these data are a little disturbing, and every time we talk about that, we say, well, the poor people, they have different health habits. Well, it turns out, this is a very complicated slide, and I'm not going to do a lot of it, except to point out that smoking is a big deal. It's on the left-hand side of this slide are the poorer people. On the right-hand side are the more wealthy people. And you can see in this forest plot that smokers and overweight people, both poor and wealthy, do less well. As you begin to look down here, income inequality, well, actually, poor people do better from income inequality than do wealthy people. That may be because wealthy people get pretty jealous about the people who are making a little more than they are. Immigrants, poor immigrants do much better, the bottom part of the graph. People who own a home do better if they're poor. Wealthy immigrants don't do as well as wealthy Native Americans. So it isn't all lifestyle things that you can come up with. Who pays? Well, there's self-pay. Self-pay accounts for probably 10 to 15% of the medical care that's paid for. There's individually purchased private insurance. There's employment-based insurance. The federal government is a big player in this. And they are a player because of Medicare, Medicaid, the Department of Defense, and the Veterans Health Administration system. You take those four components, the government is paying currently for somewhere around 60 to 65% of healthcare. That's a lot. A couple of elections ago, one person who had hair the color of mine said, "Get your government hands off my Medicare." It turns out that Medicare is a government program. TRICARE is the care that is given to all of the dependents of servicemen. And then there's state and local governments. And we never think of state and local governments as providers of health care. I did my internship at Cook County Hospital. State, county government paid my salary, wasn't much, but they paid my salary, they paid for all the care that people got, they paid for the hospital, they paid all of the staff that went into the hospital. So state and local governments also are major players in who pays for healthcare. So healthcare has had some component of somebody else paying for it since 1892. In Chicago, there was a Medical Aid and Burial Association. It turns out there are burial associations all over the country. In Chicago, the system looked something like this. It was not an insurance company, because it was against the law to have health insurance. You joined for $1, and then you could get somewhere around, 16 different types of contracts. You could also read the fine print if you could read it, but you didn't have glasses that would allow you to read it easily. But if we paid a weekly dues of 5 cents, you could get medical care for up to $5 a week. If you paid 25 cents, you could get medical care up to $5 a week and burial of $100. There are other groups that have gone into the development of paying for health care. One of the first real politicians to ask about health care was Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt is reputed to have said something to the effect of all the questions that can come before this nation, short of the actual preservation of its existence in a great war, this is before World War I, There is none that compares to leaving the land better today than it was for our descendants than it is for us. Let me add, the health and vitality of our people are of at least as great worth conserving as are the forests, water, lands, and minerals. That was in 1912, when he was the head of the Bull Moose Party. In 1929, the beginning of the recession, nobody could pay for health care, and Baylor Hospital in Dallas was going broke. They decided that they would have a contract with the teachers union to say, if you pay us some money up front, we'll pay for up to a week and a half's worth of care for you in a hospital. 1935 was the Social Security Act. Then came the Second World War, and when the Second World War happened, wages were frozen, prices were frozen, and so companies had to think of some way that they could, without increasing wages, encourage their employees to stay with them. So they developed health insurance that was sponsored by the company. It wasn't taxable to either, so it wasn't part of wages, but that became a big deal. Everybody from then on began to worry about, could you keep your job in order to keep your health care? In the second part of the year, of the century, Social Security Act got amended with Medicare. How many of you know that there are at least 4 different parts of Medicare? There are actually 5. Hospital care is under one trust fund, and physician care is under another trust fund. Medicare Choice is an HMO that was developed in 1997. And the Prescription Drug Act that many of you are on now was only this century. In 1993, the president and his wife tried to create a health insurance program based upon some principles from other politicians. So I'm going to read you another quote, and I want you to think about who might have said this in this period. One of the most cherished goals of our democracy is to assure every American an equal opportunity to lead a full and productive life. In the last quarter century, we've made remarkable progress towards that goal, opening doors to millions of our fellow countrymen who are seeking equal opportunities in education, jobs, and voting. Now it's time we move forward again in still another critical area, health. Without adequate health care, no one can make full use of his or her talents and opportunities, and it's just as important that economic, racial, and social barriers not stand in the way of good health care as it is to eliminate those barriers to a good education and a good job. 3 years ago, I proposed major health insurance program to the Congress, seeking to guarantee adequate financing of health care on a nationwide basis. That proposal generated widespread discussion and useful debate, but no legislation reached my desk. Democrat or Republican? Democrat?
No.
Who said Republican? Who was it? It was Nixon. Richard Nixon said that, and he is probably the furthest right-wing, was probably the furthest right-wing politician ever in the country. The Patient Protection Affordable Care Act became law 20 years ago now. It's still very controversial, although it does tend to help many people be able to afford health care. Well, we talked about that. We said we wanted quality care, and I asked you what quality was, and then I paraphrased Justice Potter Stewart, maybe or maybe not correctly. But if we look at quality, how do we measure it? We can measure it by what you do. Does your blood pressure get taken? Is your oxygen saturation taken? Do they take your temperature? Do they give you insulin if you've got diabetes? Those are process measures. How many of you are really interested in those process measures? Yeah. Outcomes. I would much rather, I think, be worried about, do you live longer? Are you back at work faster? Are you feeling better? Those are outcomes. How many of you are interested in those? Okay. You can measure how you live longer, you can't measure a bunch of the rest. There was a physician named Donabedian, and he said, I'm going to create a system where I'm going to look at quality. I'm going to say quality is related to structure, where you go, the processes, and the outcomes. Now, he didn't come up with exactly how that formula went beyond those are the three things he's going to deal with. Patient satisfaction. Some of you said you wanted your doctors to talk to you and listen to you and take care of you. That would make you more satisfied. That's part of the new paradigm of healthcare. Then there are all kinds of metrics. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has a whole series of compares that they look at. I'll show you a compares diagram in a minute. The American College of Cardiology that I belong to has given us the guidelines. The Society for Thoracic Surgery and the Society for Vascular Surgery were amongst the leaders in measuring what happened to patients. And as they measured what happened to patients, what do you think happened? They got better. Who are the stakeholders in healthcare? There's hospitals and doctors. There's the government. There are multiple payers. The government, Medicare, Medicaid, the Veterans Administration. There are other payers, right? Blue Cross Blue Shield, Anthem, many others. There are vendors. Pharma is the pharmaceutical, it was started out as the Pharmaceutical Research and Marketing Association. They put the research in there first. That may or may not be true. There are other vendors. Anybody here have a pacemaker? Anybody here have an artificial hip? Or knee? Those are vendors who make those toys. There are also vendors who make electronic medical records and look at information technologies. There are organizations that certify that your hospital meets at least minimum standards. There are patients and patient organizations. So I got at least 5 different groups of stakeholders. It's a little tricky. Hospitals. There are multiple hospitals. There are somewhere around 5,564. That's a pretty exact number of hospitals currently in the United States. About 600 of those are Catholic. The remainder are other organizations. And there are investor-owned hospitals, so-called for-profit hospitals. How many of you think that the religious and non-religious and academic hospitals provide better care than do the investor-owned hospitals? How many of you think the investor-owned hospitals provide better care? How many of you have no idea? Well, the answer is they both provide about the same care. And they both provide about the same amount of charity care. Even though the religious organizations, the non-religious organizations, and the academic hospitals are not for profit. That's an interesting term. Hospitals, this is what's happened to hospitals since 1975. There has been a 22% decline in numbers of hospitals in this country over the last 40 years. Well, that's kind of disheartening. Hospitals are providing employment to people. I would posit, however, that the reason for a hospital is not to provide employment, it's to provide health care at a minimum cost. This is a chart that I made out of Hospital Compare, because we all think if you go to a hospital, you get the same stuff. This is from Chicago, and what I have done is I've looked at Northwestern Memorial, Rush Hospital, University of Illinois, University of Chicago, Christ Hospital, and Loyola Hospital. Those are all academic medical centers. And I've looked at heart attack, heart failure, and coronary bypass surgery. Those are things that I'm interested in because I'm a cardiologist. The greens are those that are better than national average. The reds, or oranges, I was told not to make them bright red because it would be bad for the people who were highlighted by those colors. The reds are worse than the national averages. None of those hospitals are the same, none of them do the same, and they all have different outcomes, including the death rate. For heart attack, the death rate's from around 10% to almost 13.5%. You'd rather go to the one that has a 10% death rate. How many of you know how to find that out, particularly when you're in trouble? So this is tough stuff. Nobody knew that healthcare could be that complicated. However, there's been an explosive innovation. Things have changed dramatically. From the time Medicare and Medicaid came in, we've had a whole bunch of things that we never thought of doing before. Paying for healthcare has been a problem for people. I've got a whole series of articles from Look. How many remember Look? Ladies' Home Journal. How many remember Ladies' Home Journal? The newspapers on having had trouble paying for healthcare as far back as 1930. So we've had this problem for a long time. It isn't easy. I don't know the solution. I think there are some things that might be able to be done. I'd be interested if any of you have a solution that you could test and make work. But if not, I thank you for your attention.